two, one.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Quillen with the Chicago Tribune, and on behalf of SABEW, welcome to today's session on metrics. Today's presentation will be led by Liz Worthington of the American Press Institute. Liz is the Institute's Director of Content Strategy. She also manages an API program called Metrics for News, which helps publishers better understand their audiences and create data-informed content strategies. Prior to joining API, Liz worked for nearly 10 years as a reporter and editor for newspapers and digital platforms, including Patch.com, the Island Packet, and the Culpeper Star Exponent. To ask a question of Liz, we suggest that you use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. If you prefer to use the traditional SABEW at sabew.org email address, you can do that as well. We will be monitoring that account. But the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen on this platform is probably the best and most direct way to get a question in today. With that, I will hand things over to Liz. Liz?
Okay, thank you, Kim. And for everyone who's listening in, I've already sent Kim the presentation, so you can get this afterward. I'm just going to email it out to the attendees. I'm also happy to pause during the presentation for questions, so Kim, you can let me know if anything comes in as I go along.
Will do.
So thanks for joining. For anybody who might not be familiar with API, we've been around since the 1940s, but we were reorganized in 2013. We operate more like a think tank now. We're nonprofit and nonpartisan, and we tackle challenges in media. This is the team at API, and we work toward advancing an innovative and sustainable news industry. We have a couple core areas that we focus on. One in particular is better understanding and engaging audiences, which is what I focus on every day. But we do also have colleagues who work on organizational change, public service journalism, and growing reader revenue. So we're happy to chat with you about any of those programs during this call or afterwards, so feel free to reach out. One of the things we focus a lot on at API, we believe the biggest opportunities for the news industry are about the audience, and we try to help organizations transform into an audience-first future. To do that, we focus on 4 key areas: understanding your audiences, which is where I spend a lot of my time, growing subscribers, advancing cultural change, and renewing the watchdog role of journalism. For today, I'm going to focus on some different metrics and tools that you can use to improve your journalism and better understand your audiences. And we'll also talk about how metrics can align with the values and with the values of your organization. So a lot of times when I talk with newsrooms, there are some things that you cover no matter what. It doesn't really matter what the data tells you. And we often hear questions like, well, how do I make the significant interesting? I think Jeff Bezos said it well, that you don't have to decide between covering something that's important and covering something that's interesting. It's your job to make the important interesting, but how you do that, how you cover it, how you frame your stories, there are ways you can dig into what the audience really cares about, so that for those stories that you are going to cover that are core to your mission, there are ways to grow that audience, even if you think it might not be possible. Why do we care about analytics? Sometimes when I work with newsrooms, they might look at analytics as a threat to their journalism, but we actually think it's quite the opposite. At API, we always say that data is indicative, it's never definitive. I don't think data is going to give you the answer on its own, but it becomes very powerful when you combine it with your editorial expertise. I can guide you on what to cover, how to cover it, and how to better serve your communities based on what they engage with. A lot of news organizations have used analytics the wrong way in the past. I think fewer newsrooms are moving, more and more newsrooms are moving away from this by focusing predominantly on page views, and instead they're focusing more on other metrics. But this definitely was a habit that newsrooms have used in the past, of just figuring out how can I get more and more page views per month, which is not the way to grow your audience or deepen their engagement. There's a lot more to your journalism than page views alone. Part of the willingness to focus heavily on page views came from what we inherited. Conventional web analytics were created to measure web pages. They were not created for journalists or for editorial purposes. And journalists don't make web pages. You are creating journalism, you're creating experiences for your community, you're writing stories about your community, and you're forging relationships in that community. So how do you measure those kinds of things? You can't capture that in just a page view. What you care about should guide what you measure. If you are heavily focused on the widest possible audience you could capture from anywhere, then maybe page views is what you care about. But if you're focused on growing a local audience, a loyal audience, a subscriber base, there are probably other metrics that you want to pay more attention to than page views alone. And we're going to walk through a couple different platforms that you might use. Some of you might already have them in your newsroom. Some of you might be thinking about new tools and platforms you want to bring to your newsroom. But figuring out what drives engagement, how you even define engagement, should first start with what you care about as a newsroom. What are your organizational goals and your organizational values? And how do the metrics that you track match up with your mission? Growing audiences can align with your goals, and this can happen regardless of the type of newsroom you're in or what your goals are. First, you need to look at, what is the news and information that you're giving your audience? What makes you unique? Why do they keep coming to you again and again? A lot of the newsrooms we work with are trying to match the coverage that they provide with what their audiences particularly care about. Online, we know that we have to specialize to give people a reason to come back. You have to provide them something unique that they're not going to find anywhere else. And you also need to give them new opportunities to buy only what they may want. We have some partner newsrooms now who are offering different kinds of subscriptions aimed at the kind of content that people want to engage with. You don't have to engage with everything if you don't want to. Perhaps there's a particular topic you care about or a particular author you want to follow. There's lots of ways you can experiment with this. So how does this fit into the big picture? As many of you probably already know, and many of you are probably in newsrooms that are doing this, journalism is moving away from heavily relying on advertising only and is moving more toward revenue from readers and users and viewers, subscribers. This is actually great for journalists and for the business if it works. There's a couple implications of this shift. You go from an organization that chases page views and scale to an organization that is focused on creating quality, loyal relationships with your users. And we see more and more newsrooms doing this. At the New York Times and other places, the Boston Globe and others, we've seen people say that we believe the demand for quality, in-depth journalism is growing and that people are prepared to pay for this. When you have that kind of mind in your newsroom, the implications of this subscriber shift is that you go from a newsroom that is a cost center that owners need to minimize to a newsroom that drives consumer relevance and loyalty. A few examples of this, and some of this data is probably a little bit dated. We created this, but the Boston Globe is one who says, we fundamentally believe our content is worth paying for. They've experimented with their paywall a lot. They recently tightened it from 5 articles to 2 per month. They have over 90,000 digital subscribers now. And the Philadelphia Media Network launched a meter, I believe it was last year. They made a couple changes when they launched that meter. They made commenting only available for subscribers. When they launched their meter initially, their page views dipped about 27%, but they were okay with that because the number of subscriptions that they were able to get in the first couple weeks of launching this meter was actually 4 times what they had expected. This number is much higher now, especially with their Super Bowl win. They got a lot more subscribers. But I've seen this happen with a lot of newsrooms who've made this shift to reader revenue, where page views do or can take a dive, but that is okay because the number of subscribers you're getting, the longtime customers you're getting, is growing. So this and others had led us to do some research about what people pay for when it comes to news, why people subscribe, what it says about the future of journalism. We did some research with the Media Insight Project, which is a partnership with API and AP NORC. And we did some interviews and we did a national survey of over 2,000 adults, asking them about why they subscribe to news. This was specifically done with recent subscribers. We found, and this research is available on our website. I'm going to highlight a couple key findings here. We found that of all of those interviewed, 53% of adults pay for news. And of those, more than half of them have a newspaper subscription. And that could be print and digital only. We also found that there's 3 types of subscriber mindsets. There's people that we call the wary grazers, who are sort of reluctant to pay for news. There are thrifty transactors, people who are willing to pay if it provides them a practical value. And then there are those who are civically committed, who want to pay for your journalism to support your mission. There's also lots of different paths to subscription. So the decision to subscribe actually happens over months and months and months, maybe even a year or more, after reading lots of articles. And there are many ways that people decide to become a subscriber. We actually, in our research, found 9 different paths that surfaced. All of these are important, but I think some of them are particularly important when you're looking at analytics. There are people who hit your paywall over and over again, and they decide because they keep seeing that message that it's worth them to subscribe because they keep engaging with your content and keep wanting to read it and want to see this message go away. So they decide to subscribe because they keep hitting that paywall. There are those that we call topic hunters. There are people who subscribe to you because you cover something particularly well. You're excellent at covering a particular topic or beat or industry or team better than anyone else, and they want to have that access to that information. This can be a really important one when you're looking at your analytics. There are those who are locally engaged. There are people who really care about their community and want to have access to that news and information. And there are people who discover you perhaps through social platforms or on their mobile device. They might just bump into you over and over again. There are other reasons that people subscribe, but I think these 4 are particularly tied to analytics and can help you develop strategies around subscriptions. Just to give you one example, we work with a partner in Texas, and they were looking at their data and found there's a particular group of people who are really engaged when they cover a college team. But this is a pretty small audience. However, it's a very affluent school, and they decided to develop a strategy around driving subscriptions around this particular team. If you looked at just the engagement data alone, it would appear that this is not a team worth covering. It doesn't generate a lot of engagement compared to other topics that they cover. But because they knew this audience, again, they're using their local expertise, their local knowledge, they saw they had an opportunity here. It ended up being one of the biggest drivers of subscriptions for them by focusing on this particular team and the coverage they could provide. And that was because they were looking at their analytics in a very specific way. They've segmented their audience to get a better understanding of what people care about locally, and how that might affect their digital subscriptions. I have more examples like that I'll share a little later on. I just wanted to show you how we've seen in our research the way that people become subscribers. And it's predominantly through these 9 different paths. If you want more about that, if you haven't seen it, you can just go to our website and you can download the full report. It's free. So that brings us to talk a little bit about analytics. Before I go into this next section, Kim, are there any questions that have come in?
I don't believe so. I was just looking at the Q&A, and Crystal, you haven't received any emails, have you?
No, not yet.
Okay, great. So I don't think so at this time, Liz.
Okay, thanks for checking.
Thanks.
So when you think about journalism analytics, there are some things we used to measure, like circulation and advertising revenue, and then there's everything that we measure now, which can be kind of overwhelming. There are tons of different metrics you could look at. There's lots of different platforms. There's analytics for each of those platforms. You have to think about what's happening with your audience online, on social, on mobile, different segments of your audience. It can be overwhelming, and it can be paralyzing to look at all of these different metrics and try to make a decision out of them. So we've tried to bucket them into different groups, and I'll also speak a little bit more about the platform we manage and how we've tried to solve this problem of too many analytics or the wrong analytics. But when you are looking at analytics, there are a few categories that make sense to pay attention to. One is popularity, which even though page views is not something you want to make every decision on, it is still important to understand what is popular, how widely content is read. So it does have a place. It doesn't mean we just ignore it altogether. But I don't think it has to be the most important thing people pay attention to. There's also analytics that help you understand depth, how much time people spend with your content. That could be in time spent, that could be in scroll depth. Chartbeat calls it quality time spent when they're looking at stories you spend, I think, at least 15 seconds or more on. So there are metrics that can help you understand the depth of engagement. There are analytics that can help you understand social, personal connections, likes, comments, shares, sharing entries, sharing rates. It can help you understand what's working with your journalism on social media and how that might be different from just what people access on your website. And then there's segmenting. More and more of our partners are now really diving deep into segmentation, getting a better understanding of the multiple audiences that engage with their journalism and not looking at it as one giant pool of anonymous people. You might be curious about how specific users and audiences engage with your content. Maybe you want to better understand your local audience. Maybe you want to better understand those highly loyal users who come back again and again, but they don't yet subscribe, but they're likely to subscribe. Maybe you want to better understand subscribers or millennials or other groups that you've identified as important to your organization. So there's lots of tools that you can use to foster better use of analytics in your newsroom. The key is choosing the right tool. Some of you might already have many of these or some of them, or you might be deciding what are the right platforms for your newsroom to use. You want to think about what are you trying to do with your analytics. If you're trying to get a better view into what's happening in real time, Parsley and Chartbeat are two options that are pretty common and popular among a lot of newsrooms. If you want to dive deep, Google Analytics and Omniture. Google Analytics, of course, is free. Omniture is not. Google Analytics is also trying to do more now to work with publishers, help them understand propensity to subscribe and things like that. So there are some new features that they've been developing. There are tools that can help you understand engagement. CrowdTangle, which of course is now part of Facebook, is a very popular way to understand what's working on social media. There are tools that can provide context. So in addition to GA, Metrics for News, which is the program that I manage at API, and I'll explain a little more about what that does. There are tools that can help you understand your place in the marketplace, like ComScore. And then there's some blended metrics like Mather and Content Insights. So we'll go through a couple of these. Some of you probably already have Google Analytics is probably the most common and probably most used with a lot of the partners that I work with. This gives you basic website data. It can give you a little focus on historical data. You're getting more and more options now with GA to segment and to look at potential subscribers. It is a heavy focus on page views. Omniture is something that I find a lot of partners use if they're in large parent corporations. There are many plans available on this. It's a more expensive product. It can help you build audience profiles. It does have more historical data reports. If you're looking for real time, Chartbeat is widely used. It has some features that can really help you dig into what's resonating on social, where people are coming from. It can help you see what's being, what percentage of your audience is recirculating on your site, how much are they reading, how far are they reading. It can give you insights into new users and people who are coming back and loyal users. There's a lot of data here. The problem can sometimes be that it can be difficult to decipher or decide how to make decisions from what you see on Chartbeat. Parsley is a blend of real-time and historical data. Depending on the plan you use, you can go back farther in your historical data. There are lots of key metrics here. A lot of the partners that I work with rely heavily on engaged time or engaged minutes. They also focus on audience loyalty and social shares. It gives you a dashboard that's organized by post and authors instead of URLs. If anyone on the call is using Mather, this is a tool that can help you focus on pricing strategy and economic modeling, but it also incorporates some editorial metrics as well. It uses some indexing. It gives you a single dashboard for viewing your user across different platforms, and there are audience segmentation capabilities built into Mather. I'm sure everyone is familiar with social analytics, everything from Facebook Insights to CrowdTangle, Twitter Analytics. This is something that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because you probably already use these. Piano is one that I've heard a lot of partners starting to use more and more. It can help you track how many people are seeing your meter. It can help you target your audience segments with specific offers, and that doesn't just have to be subscriptions. It might be a message that says, hey, I noticed you've read a lot of this reporter's content. Maybe you want to sign up for their newsletter, things like that. And it can help you track the user journey to see what content is prompting them to actually convert and buy a subscription. It can help you better understand the path to conversion that way. And then, of course, is the one that I know the most about, which is the one we manage at API called Metrics for News. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what it does, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone after if you'd like more information or perhaps a demo. But what we wanted to do with Metrics for News was try to solve at least 3 big problems with analytics. And the first is what you measure. So as we talked about earlier, conventional web analytics are great at telling you if your overall traffic is increasing or if a particular story performs well, but they're not great at telling you why. You know, why does your audience engage with you? What do they read? Why do they keep coming back? So we wanted to give publishers the ability to track those things. And we created a software that you can tag your content for some of the key journalistic qualities you care about. And you can do this either fully automated or manual or a combination of the two. But we help you track your stories for the topic or beat that it's about, the person who wrote it, if this was an original piece of content or if you're responding to news of the day, the depth of reporting that went into it on a scale from something pretty simple, like a brief, to things you do every day, like your daily news stories, to your more involved investigative enterprise work. We also track why people read your content. We call those relevance, and they were developed by Tom Rosenstiel when he was at the Project for Excellence in Journalism. So it allows you to track on a particular story, why would this be appealing to the audience? Is it helping them solve a problem? Is it explaining something really complex? There's a series of tags that you can add to those stories. A lot of this is information that an editor would just have in their brain. They know what the story's about. They know what the appeal is. They know the enterprise level. They know if it had a photo or a video. And they're just taking all of that data and dumping it into an app and turning these hundreds and thousands of stories into structured data to help you see what people engage with and why. This is an example of what one of those tagging systems looks like, and it can help you track. You can see the topics on the right-hand side. You can see different tags at looking at the author and the type of author, if this is on staff or if it's a freelancer, for example. You can select the enterprise level, which is really the story form. You could track location. You could track different kinds of videos, if it's breaking news, etc., if it was in your newsletter. This is entirely customizable. This is something that you can make unique to your newsroom and what you cover, but it gives you the ability to get a little more information around what people engage with and why, and it focuses more on the qualities of your journalism than anything else. So what that does is it allows you to turn your web analytics into news analytics. So you can answer some of these questions, like which topics perform the best or drive the most engagement? What kind of difference does it make in engagement if my story has a photo or a video or an interactive element? What level of depth do readers want on each subject I cover? And why do people engage with different kinds of news? It can help you answer those questions. The other big problem we're trying to solve with Metrics for News is who you measure. So a lot of people measure their audience like this, just one giant pool of anonymous people. That's not really what your audience looks like. Your audience is made up of lots of different kinds of audiences within that one large group. So you probably want to measure groups that matter to you. That could be your local readers, people in your local market. The content that they engage with might be more relevant to you or more interesting or valuable to you than anything that anyone could find online. You also have your casual readers who maybe come once a month, if that, but you do have to care a little bit about this group to grow your audience ultimately. But they're going to be pretty different from your loyal visitors, those people who come back again and again, who act like subscribers but don't yet pay for your journalism. That group is also going to be increasingly important, especially if you're in a newsroom that's focused on growing digital subscriptions. And then, of course, you have your subscribers. I heard the Boston Globe at a panel recently where they talked about the biggest way to grow more subscribers is to keep your existing subscribers happy. So you want to know what it is they engage with and how are they different from other audiences that engage with your journalism. And we have a lot of newsrooms now who are focused on what they call the funnel, really moving people from a casual user to a subscriber. So when you do that, the metrics that you care about are going to be different based on who you're looking at in that funnel. Your casual users, for example, you might be focusing more on total page views and referrals from social media. As you move farther down the funnel, though, you're going to be caring more about loyalty metrics, the total time per user, the page views per user, who stops at the meter, those kinds of things. And then when you get to your subscribers, you're going to be looking at page views from subscribers, the amount of time they spend, how much they share your content, etc. So there are different things that matter at each stage of the funnel, and we can help you segment that audience and understand them so that you can answer some of these questions, like how are my subscribers different from non-subscribers? What is the path to conversion for my loyal users? How are the habits of my regular readers different? And how should I treat my casual visitors differently than my loyal visitors? So the other piece of this, beyond who you measure and what you measure, is how you measure, which is one thing that makes our platform pretty unique from other analytics platforms you might use. We found in working with a lot of newsrooms that some of them either have too many good numbers or the wrong numbers that they're paying attention to. And editors have often felt torn in uncomfortable directions. They might not know which metric matters the most or where they should spend their time. It can also be a difficult conversation, which metric matters the most or how you define engagement. Those are some things that are important conversations to have first to understand how do the metrics that we look at and act on fit into our overall mission and the values of our organization. So one of the ways we're trying to solve for too many metrics is with indexing. I know this is a group of business editors and writers, so I don't need to explain indexing to you. But we're trying to give you a single score to understand how your journalism is performing. We call it the overall engagement index. It is a blended metric. It is a combination of page views, of time spent, sharing, and it's weighted to what you care about with emphasis on key segments. So we actually weight local and loyal metrics more than we do some of the others because we think that the views and the time and the shares you get from your local and loyal audience matter more than just your entire audience. But this is a sample and it's a starting point. Everyone who uses metrics for news gets our generic overall index, but you also have the ability to create your own custom indexes. You can also create indexes for segments. You might want to create a subscriber index, for example, or a casual reader index to understand the different kinds of groups. We have lots of partners who have been experimenting with that and trying with that, and we can share some of the things that they're doing, how they're segmenting, with their permission, of course. Those who have tried it are pretty willing to share what they've done, so that they can better understand not only their overall audience, but the key segments that they're trying to grow. So this is just an example of how that indexing looks when you run a report. Instead of having a list of what drives page views and what drives time spent and what drives shares, We're giving you a single number that's very simple to understand, but it's comprehensive. So in this particular example, this is just a screenshot. It's not showing, every topic that a newsroom would cover. It's just showing you the ones that are driving the most engagement so far. But this index is based on 100, so anything over 100 is performing above average. And in this particular example, it's showing you that crime in courts is performing 72% better than the average. This is the topic or the beat that's driving the most engagement. And you can see the others that follow: dining, disasters, business coverage, downtown redevelopment, local government, etc. There are lots of other ways to listen to your audience. Data is just one of them, but there's also qualitative data. There are surveys that you can do that move beyond conventional market research, and we have a lot of experience doing audience surveys as well, if anyone's interested in that. There are focus groups. There are newsrooms we've worked with who've created reader advisory panels that come in once a month and give insights and feedback on the coverage that they've done over the past month. And there's design thinking. We worked with some newsrooms who've actually created personas so that when reporters sit down to write their stories, they're thinking about a particular person that they're trying to speak to with their coverage. So we've done metrics for news now for about 4 years. We've worked with about 70 newsrooms across the country, big and small, some teeny tiny community papers, some major metros. We've worked with some radio and some TV and some niche-oriented publications, and newsrooms have tagged nearly 1 million pieces of content so far. So there are some things we've learned that seem to be universally true. Of course, every market is different, every community is different, but when we look at the data in the aggregate, there are some things that continually surface. And I wanted to share just a couple of those with you. One of the things we've tracked, which I showed you in the tagging screen, is what we call enterprise. And at API, we define enterprise as the level of effort that went into something on a scale from something really simple, like a brief, to things that require a lot of work and a lot of resources, major enterprise. For most of our newsrooms, a major enterprise story would be something that they spent a week or more on. Perhaps a Sunday centerpiece or a major investigation, but it doesn't all have to be major investigations or long series of work. It can be at least a week or more that you spent. It's usually a long form piece of journalism, something that involves a lot more sources and a lot more reporting effort. But we've found when we look at the data that the major enterprise work is the biggest driver of engagement. On average, when we're looking at that overall engagement index, that blended metric, major enterprise work boosts engagement by over 55%. However, it makes up just 1% of all content across all 70 partners. So there's not enough of this that's done. I know that this is the kind of reporting that a lot of journalists want to do, but it takes a lot of time. So you have to figure out, what can I scale back to make more room for this? And that's one thing that Metrics for News can help you answer. Another key driver of engagement we found is what we call initiative, which is really a measure of your originality. It is those stories that you dream up in your newsroom that readers are not going to find anywhere else. It's not reacting to news of the day, but it could be a unique angle on a story that everyone is covering. We've also found that really across all beats, watchdog reporting is what readers crave most. This tends to drive up engagement by over 40%, regardless of the beat. And we've also found that people like long stories, even online, even on their mobile phones. Long-form journalism drives up engagement by 60% in most cases. But when we're not looking at everything, when we're looking at particular beats, for example, we've learned that specializing matters. People have to have a reason to come back to you again and again. And in the research we've done on how people consume news, we've seen that a lot of people are looking for particular topics. More than their age or their politics, the topics that they care about is what drives what they engage with. And specializing in something or covering a particular topic or beat especially well and better than anyone else is one of the big opportunities to grow your audience and deepen their engagement. It's also an opportunity for you to foster more subscriptions and to help you prioritize coverage when newsrooms are shrinking. You can't continue to cover everything and be all things to all people, but if you do have a few key topics that serve as priorities for the newsroom, it can help people decide how to spend their time. To give you one example, and I have a lot of these, but I just included a few in the presentation today, especially knowing that many of you are business editors and writers and reporters. We have a partner in Florida that focused on 3, they called them franchise topics. Some of our partners call them pillar topics, just really specialties. And one was on growth and development. They called it Shaping Our Future. There was a lot of changes happening in their community, a lot of changes to the local business climate, and with a major rail line coming through. And so they wanted to do more coverage around what's happening in their community from a local business perspective, and also from this change in the rail line going through their community. They definitely saw growth to all of their franchise topics, some in the triple digits. But aside from that, the newsroom had the added benefit of boosting engagement across everything that they covered. This was because they were becoming much more selective about what they covered and how they covered it based on their engagement data. So in the course of a year, they saw their page views go up 40%, so across everything. They saw time spent go up almost 80%, and they saw over 100% more shares. So we took a deeper look at all of the partners that really focus on business and economic coverage, and we found a couple things that surfaced in that data. Now, this may or may not be true for your newsroom, but these were, when we looked at the data in the aggregate, these were the things that surfaced. We found that organizations that focused on a real theme to their coverage tended to have stronger engagement numbers than just covering business generally. That could be something like Shaping Our Future, that could be living in the local economy, things like that. And we've seen that thematic type of coverage work regardless of the beat, not just inside business. When you have a real theme that you're trying to explain to people or better understand, that tends to be stronger than just the general beat. We've seen inside business that stories about food and dining perform much higher than anything else. In some communities, this is especially strong. We've seen that on average, it can boost engagement over 60% when you're talking about new businesses that come to the area, or about the changing dining scene, things like that. Major enterprise, if you remember from the previous slide, in general, boosts engagement about 55%, but it does even better inside business and economic coverage. Those major enterprise stories tend to boost engagement over 70%, and initiative stories, those original, unique stories, can lift your engagement by 30%. We've also seen inside business coverage, watchdog stories, or stories that are meant to help people talk about what's going on in the news, or short stories on places to go and things to do, like where to find a job or a job fair, for example. Those can be the kinds of stories that drive engagement up inside business and economic coverage. I have another example from a partner in Ohio that wanted to reshape the business beat based on their metrics for news data. They learned kind of overall across everything in their newsroom that major enterprise and watchdog work were the biggest drivers of engagement. And so they used that to completely reorganize their whole newsroom. They changed beats, they assigned reporters to those beats based on their strengths. And inside business, they saw that their major enterprise investigative work was driving the most engagement for them, which was not a surprise, but it is something that takes a lot more time. So they decided they wanted to give their newsroom the opportunity to do more of this work. So they actually created a new position, an investigative reporter position just for business, and they assigned one of their strongest reporters to it, one of their strongest business reporters, but they still wanted to have some of that general jobs and economic news. They didn't think it needed to be a full-time beat. So they actually created a partial beat for that someone covered about 2 to 3 days a week. And then they had the investigative reporter. This was his full-time job to do investigative business work. And the person who spent 2 to 3 times a week on jobs and economic coverage also contributed to those efforts, spending the rest of the time on those investigative projects. That's a pretty recent change, so I don't have any data yet to share of how much it has changed their engagement, but we will be tracking that. So the primary ways that people use metrics for news is to first just better understand their audiences and identify the kinds of content that they want to serve them and how they want to serve it. They also use metrics for news to better equip their staff with more data about their journalism and why people engage with it. And they use it to support unifying goals of their organization. So some of those could be serving targeted content to targeted audiences. It might be helping to drive their strategy around building more digital subscriptions, and just moving more people from an occasional user to a habit of coming to visit them again and again, and ultimately paying for their journalism. So I think metrics for news can help you do all of these things. It can help you decide where to focus your resources. It can help you decide how to cover certain topics, how you create it or how you package it or present it. But even if you weren't going to use metrics for news, I think some of those data points are interesting and things that you could bring to your newsroom: more major enterprise, more initiative. Other things that you could do now, regardless of the analytics platform that you have, are just to make sure you have access to the analytics that your organization cares about. And if you are in charge of granting people that access, making sure your team and your reporters have access to that. We've also seen that, beyond what the data can tell you, there are other things about your journalism that can affect whether a story is going to be a success or not. And some of those are not measured in analytics, like the kind of headline that you have can really help you or hurt you. There are other things as well, but if you start a Slack channel or a way for reporters and editors to brainstorm different kinds of headlines that could bring people into that story, that can make a big difference. And we've seen some people do this just in Slack, where they try to get help virtually in real time. We've seen people like the Dallas Morning News put up a giant whiteboard in their newsroom and have people vote and offer suggestions on new headlines. And it happens at the same time every day, so people can participate. You can also make sure there's a better collaboration between your audience or analytics team, if you have one, and the newsroom staff. Sometimes, even if you don't have a team devoted to audience or analytics, there are usually a person or two who follow analytics in the newsroom and want to share what's working or not working. And they can be a great person to just make available either through Slack or meetings, or serve as a resource for the rest of the team. At API, we have a couple of resources. One, of course, is the platform that I manage that I'm happy to share more information about. We also have a new resource we've developed in partnership with other organizations called betternews.org, which is free. And there's a lot of information on there. Regardless of what you're trying to do in your newsroom, you can probably find something, whether it's analytics or cultural change or building new audiences. There is some drop downs at the top where you can just search based on what you're trying to bring to your newsroom. And these are all free resources and case studies of what newsrooms have done and how they fostered changes in their newsroom. So that would be a great place to check out as well. And in addition to Better News and metrics for news, you can also connect with us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on through our API Need to Know newsletter. So I'm happy to take some questions now.
Thank you, Liz. There is one question in our Q&A section, and it's from Ravi, and he asks, how reliable is scroll depth as a metric? Are there any tools to measure scroll depth? That was a good question.
Yeah, so scroll depth is a good metric to help you understand how deeply engaged people are with your stories. I know Chartbeat makes this easily accessible. I'm not entirely sure how reliable it is, but it is a good way for you to get an understanding of the depth of engagement, in addition to time spent, which will also encompass some of that.
Thank you, Liz. To our members, you can ask a question by using the Q&A format at the bottom of the platform. We are taking some questions by email at sabew@sabew.org. Does anyone else have any questions to pose to Liz?
Hi, Kim and Liz. I actually have a question from Tom Herman, and he asks, is it possible to measure not only what people read, but how far down in the story people read?
Yes, so that would be the scroll depth metric that we just talked about. I know you can access that through Chartbeat, I think through Parsley as well, but it will help you see how far down they went. And I think you have the ability to create a metric around that in Google Analytics, but you have to look. I think there are other ways that you can capture that. But that would be the metric you'd look at, is scroll depth.
We have thank you, Liz. We have another question from Ravi. He asks, do the partners you have collaborated with, have they tested A/B headline testing?
I've had one partner do that in Metrics for News. I think there are other ways to do it as well, even within your own site or the CMS that you might have. And there are some other publishing tools that are out there that can help you do that too. I know the Washington Post, ARC publishing suite, I forget the name of it, but I know they have a tool that can help you apply the best headline through some A/B testing.
Thank you. We don't have any other questions at the moment, but we'll give people a few minutes to pose them. If you do have a question, please submit it through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, or you can also try emailing sabew@sabew.org. And Crystal, my Q&A function just disappeared. I don't think there were any questions. Can you see any other questions, Crystal?
Yes, one just came in, and Kate Butler asks, what's the biggest barrier to using these analytics?
So I might need to get a little more information from you on which analytics you want to use. I think sometimes newsrooms can feel like analytics is a threat to their journalism, and it doesn't have to be. We think it can enhance your journalism. And one of the reasons we try to blend a lot of key metrics into a single index is because it can be overwhelming and even paralyzing to try and look at all of them at once and make a decision. I think one of the things we encounter a lot is newsrooms want better tools and want better analytics, but they haven't often always told the staff what their mission is as an organization, or what are the values that they have, and how do those metrics align with those values. I think that's an important conversation that newsrooms need to have before they decide to bring on a new tool or a new platform, is just to help the staff understand how this fits into the overall mission and why these metrics matter to them. I think that's one thing that's powerful about our custom indexes is you can decide the metrics that you want to include that you care about.
Do we have any other questions for Liz?
We had one come in from Karen Robinson Jacobs, and it's, do you have data on how long new subscribers stay? Do they take limited time offers then drop?
I don't have that data. That would be something that I think you would probably have better access to than me. I don't think I can pull that in, but I can pull in custom metrics based on how you define them in Google Analytics or Omniture. So we can pull in metrics that are just about subscribers, and we could even pull in metrics that are just about newly converted subscribers. So there are ways to better understand the different types of subscribers that you have, but your organization would probably have those numbers of how many people have dropped off after first-time offers.
Okay.
So if we don't have any more questions, Liz, I don't know if you had any final thoughts that you wanted to share. If not, we can begin to wind down if we don't have any more questions coming in.
Well, thank you for your time. I know it's hard to get everyone together, so I appreciate people who attended, and I've sent the presentation to Kim, who can share it out, and if you want to reach out to me, please feel free. My email is on the slide here.
Yeah, definitely. Liz, thank you very much to you and to API. This has been a great session, very informative and helpful with a lot of takeaways. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Kim.
To our members, watch your email for information about next month's training session. That will be held on Monday, July 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and that session will be on the business of being a freelance writer. So you might keep an eye out for information on that. And finally, as always, if any of our members have suggestions about future training topics, please feel free to email SABEW at sabew.org with those thoughts, and we'll certainly take them into consideration and do our best. So it doesn't look like we have any final questions, unless, Crystal, have you gotten any by email?
No, none have come in.
Okay. Well, I guess that we will end then. I think that concludes today's session. And Liz, thank you again very much.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Take care.
Okay.